A mother and son disappeared after church. Then a local found their car, still running, empty and unlocked. Her car was found still running on a city street. Her phone, her purse, and her 10-year-old son's shoes were still inside. But Tameka Rollins and her child were gone. It would take an anonymous blog post, a dusty basement, and a dying whisper for the truth to surface. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It means everything to know we're telling these stories together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Tameka Rollins stood in front of her hallway mirror, gently smoothing the edges of her son's collar. Dorian squirmed and grinned, holding a small plastic dinosaur in one hand and a slice of buttered toast in the other. "Mama, can I bring T-Rex to church?" he asked, eyes wide with pleading. Tameka smiled, brushed a crumb from his cheek, and kissed his forehead. "Only if he stays quiet during the sermon," she said. It was their Sunday ritual: get dressed, eat breakfast, and walk the few blocks to Morning Glory Baptist. Tameka's mother, Loretta, would usually ride with them, but today she had a cough and insisted they go without her. Outside, the air was warm and still. Tameka wore a cream-colored dress with gold trim and had tied her braids back with a satin ribbon. Dorian, just 10 years old, wore a navy vest over a white shirt and beige slacks, his favorite grown-up outfit. Their white 2005 Ford Taurus waited under the sycamore tree near the curb, engine quiet, sun baking its hood. The car had seen better days, but it still got them where they needed to be. Church was lively that morning, as always. Deacon Hill sang a little too loud. Sister Laverne waved her handkerchief like she was trying to cool the entire congregation, and the pastor, Reverend Moore, preached about not letting fear of the world stop you from protecting your blessings. Tameka nodded along, holding Dorian's small hand while he doodled in the margins of the bulletin with a half-broken pencil. Afterward, they picked up a couple of to-go lunch plates, fried chicken, cornbread, collard greens, and chatted briefly with other families in the parking lot. Dorian ran ahead to the car, waving at his friend Malik before slipping into the passenger side. Tameka unlocked the doors, set her phone on the dashboard, and placed the food carefully in the back seat. Witnesses later said it looked just like any other Sunday. Nothing seemed wrong, but something was. By 5 o'clock that evening, Loretta Branch was pacing her living room floor. She had expected to hear the car pull up hours ago. She had called Tameka twice. No answer. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. She peeked through the curtains like she always did, expecting to see them come up the walk any minute. But the sidewalk stayed empty. Sunset was near when she called around. No one at church had seen them after they left. Dorian hadn't texted his cousin. None of Tameka's friends had heard from her. At 6:22 p.m., Loretta called the police to report them missing. The dispatcher asked if maybe they'd just run an errand or taken a detour. Loretta, with her firm but tired voice, said no, her daughter was not like that. Tameka didn't just disappear. Not without telling her mama. An hour later, police responded to a call from a resident about a car idling near 9th and Bailey. Engine still running, doors unlocked. When officers arrived, they found a white Ford Taurus parked awkwardly near the curb. Inside were 2 styrofoam lunch containers, still warm. A purse sat in the back seat. A cell phone lay face down on the dashboard, screen cracked. In the front passenger seat were a pair of small black dress shoes, Dorian's. No one was inside. The street was mostly empty. The nearest surveillance camera from a corner liquor store only partially captured the moment the car turned onto the block. There was no clear footage of who got out or when. Police filed the report and noted that there was no sign of struggle. The vehicle wasn't damaged. It wasn't until Loretta arrived at the scene, breathless and shaking, that urgency began to rise. "Where's my baby?" she asked. "Where's my grandbaby?" Officers said they were still investigating, but no Amber Alert was issued. They said they didn't yet have proof that the child was in immediate danger. Loretta almost collapsed from rage. She pointed to the shoes in the front seat. "Does that look normal to you?" she shouted. Tameka Rollins had never vanished before. She wasn't the type. She worked long hours at the senior home and still made time to walk Dorian to school, make dinner, help with homework, read bedtime stories. She didn't go out at night. She didn't have enemies. She didn't trust many people. Loretta knew something was terribly wrong, but the police labeled it a welfare check, not an emergency. A missing adult and a child, with no confirmed abduction, meant waiting. Waiting. Loretta didn't wait. That night, she called Simone Keyes, a local reporter who ran an independent blog covering underreported stories in East St. Louis. Simone had once covered an eviction crisis Loretta's friend went through and wasn't afraid to stir public pressure. By 11 p.m., Simone had posted a breaking article online titled, "Mother and Son Vanish After Church. Car found still running. Child shoes left behind." She included a photo Loretta had given her of Tameka and Dorian taken on Easter. Both smiling, both in bright colors, both unmistakably full of life. The post spread fast. By morning, hundreds had shared it. People in the neighborhood began leaving tips in the comments. One of them stood out. "Check the alley behind the old laundromat." It was anonymous, no return name, just a sentence that hung in the air like smoke. Simone saw it at 3:13 a.m. She screenshotted it and sent it directly to the detective listed in the case log. When Detective Randall Vicks arrived at his desk that morning, groggy with coffee, he had 6 new voicemails and 3 printed copies of Simone's blog waiting for him. His supervisor tossed one on his desk and said, "Looks like the community's doing your job for you." Vicks frowned. He didn't like bloggers getting in his way. But even he couldn't deny the tip. The alley was 2 blocks from where the car had been found. It wasn't on their initial search grid. It hadn't been mentioned in the dispatch reports. He marked it on a map, grabbed his keys, and headed out. He didn't know it yet, but what waited behind that laundromat would change everything. Detective Randall Vicks pulled up behind the boarded-up laundromat just after 9 a.m. The building had been condemned for over a year, its windows painted black, the back alley clogged with old mattress springs and busted tile. But that morning, the alley buzzed with quiet urgency. 2 patrol officers already had the area taped off, and a third stood over a half-crushed church program, lying face-up in a patch of gravel. Vic stepped around a pile of glass bottles and crouched beside it. "Dorian Rollins," he muttered, reading the name in neat type on the program cover. A greasy fingerprint smudged the corner. He placed it carefully into an evidence bag. The alley itself told a story if you knew how to read it. Deep tire impressions curved along the gravel path, then reversed out toward the main street. Broken weeds were flattened in a strange arc, like something heavy had been dragged. No blood, no screams, no witnesses. Just the weight of something wrong. Vicks took a long breath, letting the stale, damp air settle into his lungs before calling in crime scene techs. They need plaster for the tire treads and UV lights for fibers. He wanted this alley swept like a murder scene, not a missing persons case. Loretta showed up an hour later, leaning on a cane, flanked by a neighbor who had driven her. She wasn't supposed to be there, but no one stopped her. She marched up to Vicks and asked one question. "Did they take my babies through here?" Vicks didn't answer at first. He didn't know. But when she spotted the church program sealed in plastic, her knees buckled. "I ironed that dress for him myself," she whispered. He folded that paper up and put it in his vest pocket. Later that afternoon, Vic sat with Loretta at her home to learn more. The living room was neat but tired, faded carpet, family photos with curling edges, the faint smell of lavender air freshener. She handed him a worn spiral notebook from Dorian's backpack. On one of the pages, a crude drawing showed a man with big shoulders and jagged teeth standing near what looked like a car. In a speech bubble, Dorian had written, "He smiled at me again." Loretta said Dorian had drawn it just last week. He told me he saw a man watching the car when they came out of the grocery store. I told him, "Don't talk to strangers." I didn't think it meant anything. Vicks flipped through the notebook slowly. On another page, a sketch showed a woman and boy walking into a building with a cross on top, likely the church. Below it, the boy had written, "Me and Mama." He was still there. His teeth looked weird. Vicks closed the book and slid it into his briefcase. It wasn't a confession, but it was a shadow. And sometimes shadows pointed to predators. Across town, Simone Keyes sat in her studio apartment combing through dozens of DMs and email tips. One name kept coming up in strange, scattered ways: Kay Milburn. The messages weren't consistent. Some said he used to hang around the corner store. One said he worked on cars. One person claimed he was dead. But Simone had a gut feeling. She ran the name through an old source, a public records database for housing violations and police citations, and got a hit. Kenneth Milburn, last known address 2 blocks from the laundromat. No current residence listed. Age 38. History of assault and resisting arrest. Simone's eyes narrowed. She typed his name into Facebook, then into a local arrest photo blog. Nothing current. But the face that popped up in a 2011 mugshot stopped her cold. Crooked teeth. Sunken eyes. Same chin shape as the boy's drawing. She emailed everything to Vix. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Detective Vix, we got something off the Taurus, the lab tech reported. Fingerprints on the glove box and rear door. Not a match to Tameka or Dorian. We ran it through the system. Hit on an old sealed juvenile file. Records expunged, but the prints remain. Vix listened, silent. The match name is Kenneth Milburn. Vix didn't wait. He returned to the alley, then drove 3 blocks over to Milburn's last listed address. The house was empty, squat, the porch sagging under its own weight. But a neighbor across the street was watering a small garden of dusty sunflowers. Vix showed her Milburn's photo. The woman squinted. That him? He used to stay there on and off, always arguing with some other man. That one who lives behind the liquor store. Think his name's Lonnie. Lonnie Gant. That name was familiar. Lonnie Gant had been interviewed briefly the night the car was found. He'd claimed to see the vehicle idling hours before the police arrived, but his timeline kept shifting. He said he was out for a smoke and said he was inside, then said he'd heard voices but wasn't sure if they were real. Vix returned to the station and pulled the original intake file. Lonnie's record was long, mostly petty theft, trespassing, and unpaid citations. But more importantly, Lonnie and Kenneth Milburn had once been arrested together, caught stripping copper from an abandoned church. Vix knocked on the door of a rundown motel off State Street around 6 p.m. The front desk clerk waved him to room 106. Lonnie opened the door wearing a grease-stained tank top and no shoes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. What now? He muttered. Vix pushed the door open with authority. We need to talk. Again. Inside the room, Vix scanned the counter. Open beer, crumpled receipts, and a burner phone. Under pressure, Lonnie stammered through his version of events. He'd seen the car. Yes. He'd walked past it. Maybe heard a woman crying. Maybe. Or a kid. Or maybe a TV. His hands trembled. Vix leaned in. You know where Kenneth Milburn is? Lonnie's jaw twitched. Ain't seen him. But Vix could smell the lie. That night, while Vix filed a request for a warrant, Simone published another article. This time with a title that pierced every parent's heart. He was watching her. Sketches point to possible abductor in Rollins' case. It included Dorian's drawing and Milburn's mugshot from 2011. The post lit up like a fuse. Within hours, her inbox was flooded. One message stood out. I heard screaming in the vacant house behind Bailey Street 2 nights ago. Thought it was a stray dog. But now I'm not sure. Vix read the tip just past midnight and stood up from his desk. He didn't even finish his coffee. He grabbed his badge and told the overnight sergeant, give me a team. We're searching that house. Now, the vacant house behind Bailey Street had been scheduled for demolition 5 years ago. But like most things in East St. Louis, it was forgotten, ignored, left to rot. The porch sagged like a frown. A rusted shopping cart blocked the front steps. Weeds pushed up through cracks in the foundation. As Detective Vix and his team moved in just after 2 a.m., the only sound was the creak of boots on hollow wood and the metallic whine of a crowbar cracking the front door open. The inside smelled like mildew, dust, and something sour. Flashlights cut across peeling floral wallpaper and scattered debris. Mattress coils, old liquor bottles, melted candles. The floor moaned with every step. Down the hallway, Vic spotted a door with 2 deadbolts on it, both recently installed. He paused, then nodded. 2 officers approached, weapons ready. They called out first. No answer. Then one stepped forward and kicked the door in. The basement was still, cold, the air thick, and in the beam of a flashlight, a single blue plastic water bottle sat on the floor near the far wall. Its dinosaur sticker was peeling. A second light swept over a pile of crumpled fabric. Torn children's clothing. Nearby, duct tape stuck to the cinder block wall in the shape of a restraint loop, the adhesive glistening under the light. A child's sock hung from a rusty nail. On the concrete was a faint stain, dried, nearly invisible. They called for forensics. Vix didn't need to wait. He already knew. The entire house was sealed. Technicians began photographing every surface, swabbing for DNA, taking hair and fiber samples. By sunrise, the lab confirmed the stain on the concrete was blood. And the sock, the water bottle, and a piece of the torn fabric all came back with partial DNA matches. Dorian had been there. When Loretta heard the news, she didn't scream. She sat at her kitchen table in silence, her eyes fixed on the sugar jar, her hands folded tight in her lap. They kept him down there like a dog, she said quietly. Simone sat beside her, recording nothing, just holding space. He was afraid of the dark, Loretta added. Always slept with the hallway light on. Always. The weight of those words hung like smoke in the air. Simone later published a new piece. The headline was short and sharp. Basement evidence confirms child was held in vacant home. The article included no photos, no clickbait. Just the truth. Cold and unsparing. Her inbox swelled with tips again, some useful, most frantic. But one message stood out. It read, Milburn ain't missing. He's hiding. Ask Lonnie again. Vix returned to the motel by noon. This time he brought backup. Lonnie Gant looked worse than before. Sunken eyes, clothes unchanged, stubble thick on his jaw. He opened the door slow, like he'd expected this. I told you he started, but Vix cut him off. You didn't tell me nothing. You danced around the truth. Now I got DNA saying that little boy bled in a basement 2 blocks from where you hang out. Lonnie's face twitched. I don't know nothing about no blood. Vix stepped forward. But you know Kenneth Milburn, and I think you know where he went. Lonnie swallowed hard. His fingers twitched near his mouth, like he wanted a cigarette, but knew better. He was scared, he muttered. Said people were sniffing around. Said he needed to move the situation. Vix tilted his head. What situation? Lonnie looked down. He didn't say no names, okay? He just told me to help. Said it was his family. That the woman had lost her mind, and the boy was his. That stopped Vix cold. Lonnie nodded slowly. That's what he said. My boy. Like it was all his business to clean up. I thought maybe it was just some baby mama drama. I didn't ask. He gave me cash to drive him out to Belleville. Said he had a safe spot. Where in Belleville? Vix asked. I didn't know the exact road, but I remember an old gas station with a broken neon sign and a dirt path that led behind a barn. That's all I remember. Swear. It was enough. By that evening, a multi-agency task force had traced satellite imagery and property records for the area Lonnie described. One farmhouse fit the criteria, off a side road near Belleville, previously foreclosed, now in legal limbo. It wasn't listed as anyone's residence. The warrant was signed before midnight, but Milburn wasn't there. The house was empty, except for signs of recent occupancy. A cot, a stack of unopened canned food, a rusted space heater, and in a back room, a single women's dress, torn at the sleeve, folded neatly on the floor beside a shoelace, and an empty jug of water. There were scratch marks on the doorframe. A broken lock. Tameka had been here, and she had fought to leave. Vix stood in the quiet, staring at the narrow bed in the corner. He didn't move for a long time. He didn't say a word. Outside, officers searched the fields with dogs. The trail was colder than expected. Later, the lab confirmed that the fingerprint found on the jug matched Tameka's. She had been alive within the last 48 hours. But there was no sign of Dorian. No toys. No clothes. No second bed. Vix called Loretta personally. We found where she was being held, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She's not there anymore. But we're close. We're going to find her. He didn't tell her that the place looked like a ghost had lived there. Like someone had moved through fast, like something scared them off. Loretta simply said, bring my daughter home. That night, back at the station, Simone waited by her car, arms folded. You think she's alive? She asked as Vix passed. He didn't look at her. I don't think. I know. And in a quiet hospital 20 miles away, a nurse noted a strange occurrence. A woman had been dropped off by an anonymous caller. No ID, no name, dirty clothes. She was barely conscious. But when they tried to check her in, she whispered 2 words. My son. Tameka had returned, but the boy was still gone. Tameka Rollins lay motionless on the hospital bed, her eyelids fluttering with each beep of the monitor beside her. Her lips were cracked, her hair matted. The white blanket draped across her body did nothing to warm the chill in her bones. Nurse Patrice Freeman sat nearby, jotting vitals, her brow furrowed. Tameka had said almost nothing since she arrived, just a whisper about her son. But now, hours later, her hand moved. Patrice leaned forward gently. Miss Rollins, can you hear me? She asked. Tameka's eyes opened slowly. Her face was pale, her gaze distant. Do you remember your name? Tameka didn't respond. Instead, her fingers twitched toward her throat, an instinctive motion, searching for something. Her necklace was gone. She let out a soft whimper, then turned her face to the wall. At the station, Detective Vix hung up the call with the hospital and stared at the empty whiteboard in front of him. Tameka had been found, but the boy, Dorian, was still missing. A cold knot sat in his chest. In all his years, he'd learned that surviving wasn't the same as safe. And trauma didn't come with closure. The farmhouse had given them few clues. No vehicle tracks, no digital trail. Milburn had vanished. But someone out there knew more. Vix returned to the abandoned house on Bailey Street, the first place they'd found evidence of Dorian. He stood at the top of the basement stairs again, flashlight in hand. Forensics had cleared the space, tagged every item, but something about it still felt unfinished. He walked slowly down the steps, his boots echoing off the concrete walls. The child's water bottle had been removed. So had the sock, the duct tape, the clothing. But the feeling lingered. Vix ran his light along the back wall. That's when he saw it. Something small wedged in a floor crack beneath the pipe. He bent down and pried it free. A tiny, mud-streaked notebook. Flipping it open, he found only 3 pages used. The first was blank. The second had a crude drawing of a boy sitting cross-legged under a cloud. The third, a note written in messy child's handwriting. He said I had to be quiet. He said Mama made him angry. He said I'm his now. Vic stood frozen. The flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. Back at the hospital, Simone Keyes arrived just as Loretta stepped out of Tameka's room for a breath. The hallway was still, save for the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. Is she talking yet? Simone asked. Not much, Loretta replied. But she keeps asking where he is, even in her sleep, over and over. Where's Dorian? Her voice cracked. Simone nodded slowly. I'll wait till she's ready. Inside, Tameka stirred again. Her eyes found the clock, then the ceiling tiles, then the corner of the room where her purse should have been. Her fingers fidgeted. Nurse Patrice returned with a warm washcloth. You're safe now, she said gently. We're going to take care of you. Tameka swallowed hard. You took my baby, she rasped. Patrice froze. Who did? I don't know, Tameka whispered. I never saw his face. He wore a hoodie. Always kept the light off. He had gloves. Patrice leaned closer. Can you tell us what happened? Tameka looked toward the window. Her voice was like paper tearing. After church, I saw him by the alley. He was staring. I didn't think much, just got in the car. Then something in the back seat. I turned and he was there. He had a knife. Told me to drive. Said if I screamed, he'd hurt Dorian. He made me keep going. Park near the laundromat. Then he made me walk. I thought maybe someone would see, but nobody did. She paused to catch her breath. He took us to that house. The basement. Tied me. Said Dorian would be fine if I cooperated. But 2 nights later, I heard my baby scream. Then he was gone. After that, he fed me once a day. Left me locked in the farmhouse. Said I was being punished. I begged. I screamed. But he just said, you did this. Tears streamed down her face. Did you ever hear his name? Patrice asked softly. Tameka shook her head. He never told me. But once he called Dorian my boy. Over and over. My boy. Detective Vix got the call from the hospital an hour later. At the same time, a new witness came forward. An elderly neighbor named Daryl Sampson, who lived in a house adjacent to the laundromat, walked into the precinct holding a plastic bag and a folded lawn chair. He claimed he'd been sitting outside 2 nights before the car was found when he heard shouting from the alley. 2 men arguing. I thought it was just a drunk fight, he said. But one of them said something like, "You better not mess this up again." And the other said, "It's under control. She don't even know who I am." Vix leaned in. "You see what they looked like? Not much. But one had a limp. Other had a black hoodie. Same 2 I seen sometimes around the old garage near Taylor Street. That was Lonnie's hangout, and Milburn's old drop site." Vix took the report and stood in the middle of the precinct bullpen, heart racing. He grabbed the map from the wall, drew a line from the laundromat to the alley, from the alley to Taylor Street, from there to the farmhouse. It wasn't random. It was mapped. This man had stalked Tameka, knew her routines, used people like Lonnie, covered his tracks. But somewhere in the panic, he'd made a mistake, and Vix was close to finding it. He stared at the evidence board. The boy was still out there, but they were closing in. Detective Randall Vix drove in silence. Beside him in the passenger seat, Lonnie Gant sat rigid, hands twitching in his lap. The early morning light painted the sky gray, a dull fog crawling along the ground as they passed fields and shuttered barns. The road was quiet, except for Lonnie's shaky breaths. "I didn't know it would go that far," he kept saying. He said it was just family business, that she'd be okay, that the boy was his. He paused. "I never even knew her name." They reached the outskirts of Belleville just after 7 a.m. A narrow path, barely wide enough for one vehicle, split off from the gravel road and curved behind a forgotten barn. There, tucked among dying trees, was a shack, windowless, sagging under its own weight, with a lock that didn't match the rotted wood around it. "This it?" Vix asked. Lonnie nodded slowly. "This where he took her. I helped him carry her out the car. She was screaming. He told me to keep the kid in the truck." He shook his head. "That was the last time I saw the boy." Vix radioed him back up. Within minutes, squad cars flanked the clearing. They didn't wait. The door was kicked open in 2 swift blows. Inside, they found Tameka. She was slumped against the far wall, wrists bruised, mouth dry, and split from dehydration. Her dress was torn. Her hair clung to her cheeks with sweat. She blinked slowly as the light touched her face. Her lips parted, barely moving. "Please," she rasped. "My son." Medics rushed in. Vix knelt beside her and gently took her hand. "We're here. You're safe now." She looked up at him, eyes cloudy. He said, "He was his boy, but he's not." "Who?" Vix asked, but her head dropped back. She lost consciousness before the stretcher even cleared the doorway. At Memorial East Hospital, Nurse Patrice Freeman moved with practiced urgency. Tameka was stabilized briefly, then taken straight into critical care. Internal bleeding, severe dehydration, infection from untreated wounds. She had held on longer than most could have, but her body was shutting down. Loretta arrived 40 minutes later, breathless and panicked. Simone trailed behind her with a hand on her shoulder. "I want to see her," Loretta said. Patrice met her at the hallway. "She's not conscious anymore," she said softly. "She lost a lot of blood before they found her. We're doing what we can." "She kept that boy alive," Loretta said. "So you keep her alive?" But 2 hours later, at 10:17 a.m., a flatline tone echoed through the ICU. Tameka Rollins died with her son's name in her chart and his face in her mind. Detective Vix sat alone in his office when the call came. He didn't say anything when he hung up, just closed his eyes and let the silence sit on his chest. Then he turned to the wall, where Dorian's sketch was still pinned beside a faded flyer and a mugshot of Kenneth Milburn. He grabbed his coat. Lonnie Gant sat in the interrogation room again, now shackled to the table. Vix placed a folder down in front of him. Inside were photographs of the farmhouse, the shack, Tameka's body. "She's gone," Vix said. Lonnie's head sank. "God," he whispered. "God, no. You lied to me before. I don't have time for more lies. Where is he? Where did Milburn take the boy?" Lonnie wiped his face, choking back tears. "He told me once. He said if anything happened, he had a backup spot. Somewhere familiar. Said he used to stay there when he was hiding from court stuff years back. I didn't think much of it, but he called it a safe house in Centerville. Somewhere off 13th and Pine." Vix left the room before the door even closed behind him. The call came in Just as he reached the area, a boy had been spotted near a gas station. Dirty, alone, holding something in his hands. Vic sped through 3 stop signs. When he arrived, he saw a clerk kneeling beside a small figure on the sidewalk. Barefoot, mud-caked pants, oversized hoodie that swallowed his frame. In his hand was a missing flyer, creased, torn, and stained, but still showing his face. "Dorian," Vix called out. The boy looked up, slow and unsure. His eyes were glassy, lips chapped, cheeks hollow. But he was alive. "I'm not his anymore," the boy mumbled. Vix crouched beside him, his voice steady. "No, you're not. You're safe. We're going to take you home." Dorian shook his head. "Mama's not there." Vix didn't answer. He wrapped the boy in his coat and carried him to the car. At the hospital, Simone met Loretta in the hallway. She didn't have words, just reached in her bag and handed over the folded flyer Dorian had been found holding. Loretta clutched it like a relic. Then the door opened, and there he was. Dorian walked slowly into her arms, his face blank, but his body trembling. Loretta sank to her knees and wrapped him tight. "You're safe, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're safe now." He didn't say anything, but he didn't let go. The funeral for Tameka Rollins was held 6 days later. Hundreds came. Neighbors, church members, nurses, strangers. All dressed in white. On the casket lay Dorian's crumpled drawing. A stick figure boy and a tall woman under a sun with the word "us" above them. A mural was painted 2 weeks later on the side of the laundromat. It showed Tameka holding her son's hand, both walking forward toward a beam of light. Above them were the words. She didn't make it home, but she made sure he did. The city moved slower after the funeral. In East St. Louis, traffic lights seemed to hold red longer. Church bells rang quieter. The white Ford Taurus sat untouched in the impound lot, its doors now sealed with evidence tape. Dorian's shoes were still inside. The flyer with his photo, creased and rain-soaked, remained in his grandmother's purse, folded between a church fan and a note from the hospital confirming Tameka's time of death. Dorian didn't speak for the first 3 days after the funeral. Not in full sentences. Not in whispers. He nodded when Loretta asked if he was hungry. Shook his head when she asked if he wanted to go outside. At night, she'd find him curled on the couch, holding a flashlight in one hand, the other buried deep in the sleeve of Tameka's old hoodie. He never cried. Neither did Loretta. Not in front of him. Instead, she boiled water for oatmeal, combed his hair with slow, careful strokes, took his hand when he stood too still near windows. She called a trauma counselor named Miss Rena, who visited twice a week. Rena brought drawing pads and clay. Dorian didn't touch them. He just stared out the window at the mural across the street. Tameka's mural, painted by a local artist the week after her burial. It stretched wide across the side of the boarded laundromat, the place where it all began. Tameka in a gold dress, Dorian in a navy vest. The two walking forward, side by side, into a beam of light breaking through clouds. Above them, in bold script, "She didn't make it home, but she made sure he did." Dorian stared at that mural like it was a doorway. Sometimes Loretta thought maybe it was. Simone visited the house 2 weeks later. She didn't bring a notepad, just groceries and a new sketchbook. "For when he's ready," she told Loretta. No rush. They sat on the porch for a while, watching the cars crawl past. "I keep expecting to hear her voice," Loretta said, yelling from the kitchen, singing in the bathroom, fussing at Dorian to eat slower. "It's like my ears know she should be here, but my heart keeps reminding them she's not." Simone didn't say anything. She just sat beside her, quiet. "I don't know how to raise a child again," Loretta said, finally, "especially not one who's walked through hell." Simone looked at her then. "You're already doing it." Inside, Dorian slowly opened the new sketchbook. On the first page, he drew a sun, then a house, then a small stick figure standing alone in a yard. He wrote the word "waiting" underneath. That was the first thing he'd written since he came home. Meanwhile, police confirmed the identity of the abductor. Kenneth Milburn, age 38. A former acquaintance of Tameka's from her late teens. They'd lived in the same complex for a short time. He made small talk, offered to carry groceries. Tameka had never thought much of it, but he had. Investigators learned that Milburn believed Dorian was his biological son. There was no proof, no paternity test, no relationship, just obsession. He had been following Tameka's life from the shadows, tracing addresses, watching from parking lots, waiting for the right Sunday. When officers closed in on a suspected hideout near Cairo, Illinois, Milburn panicked. He was found hours later in a motel bathroom, dead, self-inflicted. He never confessed, never explained, never faced the woman he stole from the world. But Loretta didn't care. "Let the devil bury his own," she said when Vix delivered the news. "We don't speak his name in this house." Months passed. Dorian began speaking again, slowly, carefully, like language was a fragile thing he had to relearn. He refused to say mama at first, but he asked about her often. What was her favorite meal? What song did she hum at bedtime? Did she ever skip school? Loretta answered every question. Every one. On the day he turned 11, Dorian stood in front of the mural with Simone and Miss Rena beside him. A local choir hummed low gospel chords in the background. The mayor made a short speech about healing and resilience. But it was Dorian who silenced the block. He stepped forward to the microphone, fingers clenched, voice barely a whisper. "She told him I wasn't his," he said. He paused. She was right. Then he looked up at the mural, his chin rising slightly. "She's still mine." The crowd clapped. Some wept. Loretta wept too, for the first time. Quietly, from a back row. Her hand pressed to her chest. That night, Dorian asked if he could sleep in her room. He crawled under the covers beside her, flashlight in hand. "I heard her once," he said suddenly, just before sleep took him. "In that place. When I was scared. She was yelling. She kept saying my name." Loretta tucked the blanket tighter around him. "I think she made him let me go," he whispered. Then he closed his eyes and slept soundly, for the first time in months. The white Ford Taurus was eventually donated to a domestic violence shelter. The mural stayed. Even as the laundromat around it collapsed, the community preserved the wall, built a garden in front of it, installed a bench with her name carved into the wood. Tameka Rollins, mother, protector, light. And every Sunday, without fail, Loretta and Dorian walk past it on their way to church. He still carries the same flashlight. She still carries the same grief. But they walk forward, always forward, just like she taught them.